What's happening, hardscapers? This is episode 8, a bonus episode of the How to Hardscape podcast, where we talk to you about how you can start and grow your hardscaping business. Tune in every week as we cover a subject and interview industry leaders on how you can grow your hardscaping business, from installation methods, techniques, tools, marketing, financials, and so much more. On today's episode, this bonus episode, we're going to talk about installing polymeric sand, everything you need to know about installing polymeric sand. This is a bonus episode because most of our audience is not going to need to refer to this episode. It might just be a one listen and done thing, but we want this to live on our podcast for any future hardscapers to be able to listen to, and for something for us to refer to if anyone has any questions about installing polymeric sand. So without further ado, let's jump right into our discussion about polymeric sand. Now, polymeric sand has a few different things that you need to focus on when installing it so that you are sure that it's not going to fail and that it's not going to be able to be eroding away with your installation. That's why we want to talk about these things that you need to consider when you're installing your polymeric sand. Now, the best way that you should be installing your polymeric sand is written right on the bag, right on the package. Follow those steps and you will be good. Now, with some polymeric sands, they have different installation methods than others, very small things that you need to be considering. But in general, and we're going to be talking about in general on this episode about installing polymeric sand, they are fairly similar, and they have very steps that you need to consider that you're going to follow to ensure that your polymeric sand is going to be successful. Now, step one is obviously ripping open those bags and spreading out that polymeric sand in a way that you're not going to be pushing it more than 10 feet in any given direction. You don't want to separate those polymers and the different particles within that sand when you are sweeping them. So you want to keep that area as close as possible. So you're not going to empty that bag all in one big lump and then having to spread it around in such a massive area. You want to keep it, you want to open a hole and kind of spread it around as you let the sand leave the bag. And then from there, you're going to sweep it. Now, when we do our first sweeping, we use a hard bristle broom. It really helps us move those piles of sand with ease, and it just spread it around, leaving a layer or so of that sand on surfaces, and just going over it again and again to make sure that that sand has at least filled the joint relatively well. After that, after you've swept it off, made sure that all the joints are filled in, we use a vibrating plate compactor to make sure that we consolidate that that sand deep within the joint. You want to make sure that sand has gone all the way to the bottom of that joint, and to do so, you tamp it. And when you are using a plate tamper to do this, we have a pad on the bottom of our plate tamper. Now, there's various pads that you can purchase for doing this consolidation of the polymeric sand. We've used gum rubber pads in the past. There's different rubbers that you can buy that bolt right to your plate tamper. We've seen, various methods, including using a mud flap of a truck on the bottom of your plate tamper, or a piece of carpet, and just fastening it to your tamper. This protects your pavers, your interlock, from getting scuffed from the plate tamper. Obviously, if you're installing a tumbled product, you don't have to worry so much about this, but if you are worried about the surface of your stones getting scuffed, and they will get scuffed from the top of your plate tamper, you want to make sure that you're protecting them. So do this to ensure that. Joints. This is where a lot of things go wrong with a polymeric sand installation, is that people install the polymeric sand right to the top of the pavers. This sand needs to be installed a minimum of 1/8 of an inch down from the top of the pavers or the top of the chamfer. So make sure that you have that little bit of a gap between the top with your polymeric sand. This is because if it's installed right to the top, you're gonna get erosion in that sand is gonna erode away from any surface. So make sure that you have a little bit of that gap between the top of your pavers or the top of the chamfer to the top of the polymeric sand. This is incredibly crucial, and some things that we see on job sites is that the sand gets filled right to the top, and over time this is going to erode away and it's going to affect the polymeric sand right through the joint. Now when you're vibrating the sand into the joint, you want to make sure that you're covering all directions, so you're going up and down, left and right, to make sure that you've got all the different joints and that sand has really penetrated through to the bottom. The more time that you take with this, the better that consolidation of the polymeric sand is going to be, and that it's going to have gone all the way to the bottom of that joint to ensure that it's stable and it's there. So once that sand has been tamped in and it is 1/8 of an inch down from the top of the paver to the top of the polymeric sand, you're going to sweep off any excess of that sand with a hard bristle broom. At first is what we use to get off any of those major buildups, and then we use a soft bristle broom to remove into any of that dust or any of that leftover product on top. Now, we definitely recommend using a leaf blower. Some products on the market, after this, they say that you don't need to use a leaf blower, but it's always good to have a leaf blower on hand to get off that additional dust that is left on top, especially products that have a little bit of cement dust binding in their polymeric sands. You want to make sure that all that's getting taken off, and it's incredibly important that you do get all that dust off. So spend your time doing a proper leaf blowing of that sand. Otherwise, you're going to get hazing, and any hazing on the stone then needs to be taken off with a chemical, which you want to avoid. So just be sure that you take your time when you're leaf blowing to get all that excess off. Now, water activation. This is where a lot of products differ, so refer to the bag when you're doing your water activation. A lot of companies recommend working in a 100 square foot area at a time. When you are installing the sand, always have the shower setting on and work within a 100 square foot area and follow the bag about how much you should be watering it. A lot of sands, once you see that white foam appear, which is just a byproduct of the sand being activated, you can move on and continue your watering to the next area, but you want to make sure that you've watered it enough. And once again, just refer to the bag to know the amount that you should be watering a specific area. Like I said, this differs from sand to sand, so I've seen people very used to a specific type of sand move on to another brand of sand and continue the same installation process only for that sand to fail. So you want to make sure that you are following those instructions as they are listed on the bag. Any residue on the top of stones, you can rinse that off with the shower setting. But once you have a buildup of water in the paver joints, you don't want to continue watering those joints. You don't want to flood those joints. You can wait a few minutes to be able to return to that area and to continue rinsing any residue on the surface. You can also use a leaf blower to blow off any excess water, any residue on the surfaces as well at this point. And follow the instructions on the bag about how long it's going to take to set, how long it needs to have a vehicle to be able to drive on it. Typically, 24 to 72 hours is what these different manufacturers recommend. A lot of residential traffic, it can be almost immediate, but just refer to the bag in terms of this information, as well as the conditions that you need to be able to install a polymeric sand in. Obviously, the surfaces of the stones, the joints of the stones cannot be wet, cannot be moist. In the wintertime, I've seen people use torches to be able to dry off the stones, to dry off the joints in order to install the polymeric sand. You also don't want water within a specific time frame. Again, different manufacturers have different time frames for rain to occur from when the sand has been wetted, when it's been able to be set. So make sure you follow that, because that will lead to failure in your polymeric sand. Also, you need to consider temperature, above 0 degrees Celsius or whatever the bag says. So as you can see, there's a lot of generalities that we can talk about when installing polymeric sand, such as sweeping it in and compacting it, and then, moving on to watering. But there's a lot of things that are very specific to each manufacturer's sand that you need to consider. So read those bags, make sure you understand the differences in the manufacturers. If you're switching to a new sand, a different type of sand, make sure you consider what type of sand to use in different settings. So an overlay setting, you need to use a different type of polymeric sand that is meant for an overlay, because you don't want water penetrating through that polymeric sand. You want no water penetration. Whereas if you are installing on a driveway or a patio, water is going to penetrate through that sand, and that's fine. So you're using a different type of polymeric sand for any setting. So make sure you're considering these things when you are installing your polymeric sand. And thank you for listening to today's bonus episode of the How to Hardscape podcast. Visit us at howtohardscape.com for more information on this subject. You can type in the search bar to find any subject of your what you're looking for. Let us know what you thought, what you learned from this episode, if any, or if anything, any other information that you'd like to add. We've gotten a lot of feedback from our podcast episodes. It's great to hear what you guys have to say about this topic or about topics that we're covering on the podcast. If there's any future episodes that you want to learn about, reach out to us on our Instagram or on our Facebook. We're at How to Hardscape everywhere. We would love it if you subscribed, left a rating on your favorite podcast app. Again, this really helps us get this podcast out there and into more people's ears, and it really helps us get more guests onto the show. Again, this is a bonus episode, so you are going to get 2 episodes today. The next episode you're gonna have listening to is an episode about warming trends, products, and installing fire pits into your outdoor living spaces.